We want to talk to you about the mayoral race in San Francisco, in your city. Can you tell us what's happening now?
Mayor Breed is very talented, but there's just a sense that we're not making progress on things like crime and homelessness and issues like that.
What do you think is the biggest problem facing San Francisco right now?
There's a political truth and then there's a truth. The political truth is, if you tell me what the crime stats are or whatever, that is a truth. And it may sway voters, but you really have to go deeper to try to understand.
My guest today is Matt Gonzalez, public defender and former county supervisor in San Francisco. Today, he'll highlight the key factors in San Francisco's mayoral race and gives us an in-depth analysis of the current top candidates.
All the candidates have wide support. One thing about this election, though, is who's going to get the runoff votes. These are the things that polling don't exactly tell you, because it's not just where you stand after the first round of voting. It's what happens when somebody you don't like and defeated them. What happens to their supporters? Where do they go next? And that's the big challenge here.
I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Matt, it's great to have you on. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We want to talk to you about the mayoral race in San Francisco, in your city. It's heating up now, and we're really close to the election. Can you tell us what's happening now?
Well, the race has been going on for over a year now. Some of the candidates got into the race very early when they saw that the incumbent mayor didn't have strong poll numbers in terms of how voters felt, the direction of the city and things like that. So there are basically 4 or 5 major candidates. You have the incumbent mayor, London Breed, and then you have challenges from current or former supervisors. Aaron Peskin, who's the president of the Board of Supervisors, Asha Safai, who's one of the supervisors. There's also Mark Farrell, a former supervisor and an interim mayor. He served as mayor during a transition after the death of Ed Lee for about 6 months. And then you have an outsider, Daniel Lurie, who's running essentially with a message that, City Hall isn't working and it's time for a different path. Yeah.
So these are the top 5 contenders, and the mayor is having somewhat of a comeback, right? London Breed, she's been trying to clean up the city, right?
Well, Mayor Breed is very talented, and if you listen to her, she's very intelligent. She's very aware of what's happening at City Hall, but what's kind of plagued her administration is the inability to, and I should say to the satisfaction of likely voters, move the needle on things like crime and homelessness and issues like that. There's just a sense that we're not making progress. It's a complicated issue because, politicians often get blamed for these intractable problems if people don't feel that they're getting better. But sometimes that's really not fair. On the other hand, a lot of elected officials win their post by doing the same thing, by arguing how they're going to address these issues or they're going to fix these issues.
By making their promises, right?
Yeah, so it's sort of like you live by the sword, you die by the sword, if that's your type of thinking. She's had some corruption scandals, some challenges that every administration deals with, right? Because you're hiring thousands of people in city government. But it seems like some of these scandals are kind of sticking and people just feel like it's time for something new. She's different than a number of former mayors in that if she's not reelected, I fully expect her to be able to stay in politics. She's relatively young, probably about 50 years old. And so many of those former mayors, after they lost the mayorship, they were done with politics. I think she could go to Congress or the Assembly. But one of I think the problems she has is she's been in office now, by the end of her term, it'll be 6.5 years or so. So she served part of Ed Lee's last term. Then when she got elected to a 4-year term, it was extended to be made a 5-year term so that the mayor's race could then be on the presidential ballot. So although she's technically only served 1 term, there's a feeling like she's been a two-term mayor because it's more than a term. And that, I think, has contributed to the kind of voter fatigue that's plagued her administration or her current standing. Now, that being said, some polls have put her in the top position or in the third position. But what the polls are finding is that because of ranked choice voting, where you pick your runoff choices when you vote for your favorite candidate, she's not picking up sufficient number of second place votes to win the runoff. She kind of makes it into the runoff because her supporters are there, right? She's got a core support, but she doesn't seem to have enough to put her into the winner's spot. Some of that is that she's got 4 opponents running against her, and they're all criticizing her, and so it's particularly challenging.
We're covering California issues, as you know. If you want us to cover the stories that are impacting your day-to-day life in California, reach out to me at siyamak@californiainsider.com. So before we get into you explaining to us how this ranked choice voting works, can you tell us what's going on with the other candidates?
Sure. The most recent poll, interestingly enough, it was by a group called Public Policy Polling, and they do national polling. And they have Daniel Lurie and President of the Board of Supervisors Aaron Peskin in the top position with about 25% of the vote each. You know, Daniel Lurie is a very interesting candidate because he's being accused of spending inherited wealth or family wealth to buy the mayorship. And there's a sense, the critique is that he doesn't know anything about government. Well, you know, his response is that he's actually partnered with city leaders in the past in bringing the Super Bowl to the Bay Area. He's one of the founders of Tipping Point Community, which is in effect a charitable foundation to address homelessness and really kind of bringing together private wealth to try to make real changes in that area. He, interestingly enough, is not quite the newcomer that he's being criticized for being. He was a field organizer for Bill Bradley's campaign for president in 2000 in Iowa, so he knows what it takes to campaign on the street and to do retail politics at that level. And he's got a master's in public policy from the Goldman School at UC Berkeley. And apparently, while there, he was very interested in studying what's called the Robin Hood Foundation on the East Coast, which was all about charitable monies going into things like homelessness. And he put together a business plan and then went out and started that organization. So he's really capitalized on this idea of being an outsider, saying that City Hall isn't working, and it's hard to enter a political contest when you've never held political office. You don't have name recognition, so he's had to spend more money to try to generate that. And very early on, he entered the race over a year ago. He started doing parties, house parties. He reached out to people that knew him, who would host gatherings, and he went and spoke. I've attended 2 of them, and I've been impressed, you know, that he's putting in the work to get it done. Aaron Peskin, who's really a totally different candidate. He's the president of the Board of Supervisors, probably the most talented legislator that I've seen in the time that I've been watching. I served with him, 20 years ago. He represents North Beach. He's been the president of the Board of Supervisors on a couple of occasions, and he is capable of really moving legislation. He has a very deep knowledge of how city commissions work and what it takes to get recommendations one way or the other. And in battles, legislative battles against Mayor Willie Brown when he was the mayor of San Francisco, I would say Aaron was probably the only supervisor that could beat him at politics. That's how good he is. He represents North Beach and Chinatown, So there's an interesting dynamic that kind of leans in his favor, which is those deep roots that he has in the Asian community. In a mayor's race without an Asian candidate, in a city with over 1/3 residents who are Asian, I think he's hoping to get a real benefit from that. You know, he's an individual that if you walk down the street in his district with him, he knows the shopkeepers, he knows the names of their kids, their partners, has genuine conversations with them at City Hall. He just doesn't know the head of an agency or a department. He knows the key staff members beneath it. So he's very knowledgeable. The critique of him has been that he is not supportive of development. He comes out of a neighborhood activism on sort of preservation of historical landmarks and buildings. And so he gets a rap for being against development at a time we need development and things like that. His response to that is that he's supported all kinds of development, which is true, and that a lot of money has been spent against him to try to turn him into an anti-development candidate. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, I was probably more aligned with kind of an ideological left perspective. Aaron was a progressive, but he didn't come from an ideological left perspective. He came from a neighborhood perspective, and so, and an honesty in government. So he's a very attractive candidate because of his longtime skill. Asha Safai is a supervisor, a two-term supervisor in the Excelsior. He was born in Iran. He did work with labor union as a political actor or director for them, I think the janitors union. And I've heard him say that he worked in the administration for Willie Brown and also Gavin Newsom, two former mayors. I don't know the direct role that he played in those administrations, but it's clear that he's been in politics for a long time.
For a while.
Now, he entered the race early as an opponent to Breed very early on, and he has a very good demeanor. He's a very attractive candidate in a lot of ways, but hasn't really caught on with voters. I think polling, he has remained in 5th place or 4th throughout the polling. I think probably it's a combination of he didn't have the fundraising capacity that the others had, and I think when he entered his race at the time there was the most attention on his candidacy, he hadn't really carved out distinctions with the mayor. He was actually a supervisor that often supported the mayor and voted favorably toward mayoral initiatives. So I think it just never caught on. I think he was right that the mayor was unpopular and people wanted a new mayor, but he didn't really articulate something different. And then Mark Farrell is the 5th candidate. He is a two-term supervisor, and he served as interim mayor before London Breed got elected back in 2018. He served in 2017 after Mayor Ed Lee died in office. It's a very complicated history because when Ed Lee died, the president of the Board of Supervisors, by operation of the charter, becomes the mayor. So London Breed became the mayor, and she put her hat in for re-election. The members of the Board of Supervisors didn't really want her to be the mayor running with this pseudo-incumbency when she hadn't been elected to the post, and there were already other candidates that were running that they didn't want a disadvantage in that way. So they actually removed her and appointed their colleague, Mark Farrell, to the mayor position. Farrell served for under 6 months in the position. He has certainly tried to leverage that period of service as, talking about the things that he did. So his efforts at trying to leverage that as a former mayor and all the good things he did is a bit of a stretch. That being said, he worked on initiatives to try to help small business. He worked on implementing Laura's Law, dealing with mental health individuals, challenging circumstances in San Francisco. So he had some accomplishments as a supervisor. His background, I should say, is in having founded a venture capital firm. One of the big problems he's had in this campaign is that he's had some ethics charges brought against him. And we've seen this before in mayoral elections where when somebody is running for mayor, they're subject to campaign finance limits. He's kind of worked around it by putting a measure on the ballot, Proposition D, that deals with commission reform, raising a lot of money for that, and that isn't subject to the same campaign finance limits. And then the Prop D folks, every time they send a piece of mail, his picture is on it. So it's sort of colluding with this other campaign, and that's not allowed. So 3 former mayors, a former city attorney, district attorney, all kinds of people have signed on to a letter asking that he be investigated for that. So his campaign's raised a couple of $1 million. The Prop D campaign has raised about $2.5 million. And I think that it's posing a problem for him right now. When he entered the race, very popular because it was a very much...
He was one of the top candidates, right?
Right. He was very much on a tough-on-crime initiative. But, some of the other candidates have pointed out that, hey, when you were interim mayor, violent crime was up, 30%, property crime was up 70%. It's not really fair to blame him for those things. Because it was only 6 months, right? But the flip side of it is he has tried to say, well, when I was mayor, we did this and we did that. So, it's what I said earlier, you live by the sword, it's going to catch up with you. When the campaigns and the mayoral forums first started, there was a very stark contrast between London Breed, Mayor Breed, and the other candidates because she's the only woman, African-American woman, articulate, has been doing the job, and the other candidates really hadn't found their voice. So I think people that watched those early forums, I think probably were giving her the edge, that she was actually acquitting herself quite well against the criticism, but somewhere that has started to shift.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China, and now is starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. And now going to ranked choice voting, how does it work? Because sometimes in San Francisco and the Bay Area, you guys get some candidates that might not be the most popular candidates, but they get elected.
Yeah, there's a real misgiving where a lot of people think under ranked choice voting, everybody's second favorite candidate wins or something like that. That's not really how it works. It basically works like a traditional runoff, right? In a normal election, you vote for who you want. You got one ballot, one vote. The top 2 go into a runoff. In a month and a half later, you have another election. Well, in that traditional runoff, what happens in the runoff? You've got 2 people, and presumably their supporters are going to continue to support them because they're in the runoff and they have their support. So the election ends up being decided by the losing candidate's supporters going and picking between one or the other. Now, there are exceptions to that. Sometimes voter turnout declines, so you actually in a runoff have less voters, and all kinds of things can happen. What ranked choice voting does is it says, let's not waste time and money with a runoff a month later. Tell us what your runoff preference is now. We're not going to count it unless your candidate has lost. So let's just play a scenario. Let's say you're voting for London Breed. Great. If London Breed is, one of the top candidates, we never look at your second vote. We only look at your second preference if she's lost the election and nobody has won yet. I'll give you an example. Let's say Daniel Lurie and Aaron Peskin each have 25% of the vote. They're the top two vote getters, and all the other 50% is divided among the other candidates. You would eliminate the bottom vote getter. Let's say Supervisor Safai gets eliminated. He had 10% of the vote. Who's their second votes go
to? It will go to the other two.
And you keep doing that till you have a winner.
It will go to the other two, or it will go to the other four?
It would go to the other four, but...
And then you will see which one will
And you'll keep doing it. Now, the reason, if you think of an analogy on why that makes sense, let's say you had an election, and this is a nonpartisan race, technically, but let's say there was one Republican and 4 Democrats running, and the Republican had 49% of the vote in the first round, and then the other ones had 30, 20, 1, so 30, 21 to 49. The one gets eliminated, it gets redistributed, that person gets eliminated, redistributed, and the Democrat wins 51 to 49. Some people say, oh, that's not fair, the fellow with the most number 1 votes didn't win. But if you think about it, 51% of the voters picked a different candidate or preferred a different candidate. So that's how it works.
And so from what you're painting, so essentially London Breed and Mike Farrell are leaning more to the middle, more conservative leaning. Is that true? And then Aaron Peskin and Daniel Lurie are kind of leaning more on the liberal side? Or is that not like that?
I wouldn't really say that. I mean, Mayor Breed is defending her record. And, there are a lot of progressive elements to her administration. Mark Farrell is probably the most conservative or moderate of the group because he's all law and order, tough on crime. And then Daniel Lurie's got this outsider status. Aaron Peskin has the support of progressives. And Safai has interesting labor support because of his work with labor, but it hasn't really translated sufficiently into other demographics, I think, to be one of the top contenders. Some of the issues are very hard to sort out. Like, Mark Farrell talks about how it's the mayor's fault because we don't have full staffing of police, and he promises full staffing. Well, is this really Mayor Breed's fault? I mean, most cities in California have seen a decline in the number of people that want to be police officers since 2020. It's not a phenomena only affecting San Francisco. Interestingly enough, when you look at the statistics in San Francisco, over the past year, property crime and violent crime is down. There's also, when you look historically at the numbers...
Do you believe the statistics?
Well, I think...
Because we are hearing some of them are not getting reported.
Some of them are not being reported, but again, I think the response would be, traditionally that's been the case also, or what can we do to try to capture the reporting around that? But even the kind of sensationalism of saying crime is on the rise, if you look at the real numbers, the statistics can be manipulated to really unfair arguments. I'll give you an example. 5 years ago, San Francisco had its lowest homicide numbers in over 50 years. I believe it was 41 homicide deaths. Okay, what if the next year it goes up to 45? Wow, it's a 10% increase in violent crime. This is not working out. This is crazy. But the mayor's not the police chief. Yes, she may have appointed the police chief, but in a 1-year period, you can't suddenly expect to lay blame for that statistic. Now, what if I also change the data point and say the homicide rate went up from 40, and now we're just making up numbers, but from 40 to 46, but the number of shootings after the 46 were very low. Whereas when we had the lower number, 40, maybe there was another 30 that got shot but didn't die. right? Which is a safer year? Well, the one with the higher homicide rate might be a safer year if you're collecting the number of shootings, not if you're counting the number of deaths. And that's something to keep in mind. A true number is if you go back to when Gavin Newsom was mayor, one of the years that he was mayor, the homicide total got to 100 by comparison. So even when we're talking 40 to 50 range, it's substantially lower than it was 20 years ago or at its peak. But these are the challenges of candidates, like I mentioned earlier, Mark Farrell using these statistical arguments, but he suffers under the statistical analysis when you look at what property and violent crime numbers were at during his interim mayorship. Homelessness is another very challenging issue. Until the Grants Pass decision that the Supreme Court just issued, it was very challenging for a city to get people off the streets in terms of sleeping on the streets. Since that decision, Mayor Breed has implemented steps to clean up these encampments. During the time period of her mayorship also, there was an important Proposition C that was passed in, I believe, 2018, which taxed businesses with gross receipts of over $50 million. So a lot of big tech firms. It's raised hundreds of millions of dollars to address homelessness and mental health issues. And she's actually expanded shelter beds by, I think the number is like 50%. So you compare these approaches. Someone like Farrell says, I went after the encampments. Well, he did it when we didn't have enough shelter beds for people and before it was really legal, or before the Supreme Court decision that really addressed the legality. And now you've got a mayor implementing the court's ruling, but also having made a commitment to shelter beds. So, there's a lot to be said. But the general feeling is there's a lot of money at City Hall right now to address these issues. She's had a good amount of time to work on it, and people are ready for something different. I think this is also one of the reasons Lurie is attractive to voters. He's got firsthand experience working on direct services for homeless folks, trying to get them out of the system into jobs, getting treatment, etc. And so again, to the average San Franciscan, the theme of being an outsider but with real world experience on the issue is very attractive.
How about the endorsements, Matt? San Francisco is a very political city, so I'm sure there's a lot of endorsements.
One of the key endorsements, particularly in a presidential contest, is the official endorsement of the Democratic County Central Committee. They gave a sole endorsement to London Breed. So we don't know how that's going to play out. Right now, the Central Committee is kind of a more moderate leaning. Interestingly, the San Francisco Chronicle endorsed Daniel Lurie, and that was a pretty big endorsement, to be an outsider who's never held elective office to get that endorsement. Aaron Peskin has the support of former Mayor Art Agnos. He's got some former supervisors that are very popular. Mark Leno, who nearly won the mayor's race 5 years ago. The tenants union, some of the more progressive organizations. But all the candidates have wide support. I think one thing about this election, though, is trying to sort out, who's going to get the runoff votes. And I think that's one of the key challenges. If it's Breed versus Lurie, the sense was that Lurie would probably win because Mark Farrell and Aaron Peskin's second votes would favor Lurie before Breed.
Because of the ranked choice.
Yeah, if it's Farrell versus Breed, there's a sense that Lurie and Peskin votes would go to Breed before Farrell. If it's Lurie versus Peskin, the big question is, what do Farrell and Breed votes, where do they go? Farrell has been dropping bombs against Lurie because they're competing for a similar demographic. And Peskin and Breed, as two folks that have worked together at City Hall, have not a direct alliance, but have a lot in common, despite their differences. So these are the things that polling don't exactly tell you, because it's not just where you stand after the first round of voting. It's what happens when somebody you don't like and defeated them, what happens to their supporters? Where do they go next? And that's the big challenge here. And then like Mark Farrell has I know he's got the firefighters, the deputy sheriff, so some key law enforcement elements there. And he's also got Grow SF, which is a local group based out of the tech industry, but definitely moderates looking for change in San Francisco.
What about to you, Matt? What do you think is the biggest problem facing San Francisco right now? Biggest challenge that you see?
I mean, I think at an election time, I always find that some of the rhetoric, there's a political truth and then there's a truth. The political truth is, if you tell me that what the crime stats are or whatever, that is a truth. But, and it may sway voters, but you really have to go deeper to try to understand, should I be alarmed? If Irvine, California has a homicide this year, should the mayor be thrown out of office because homicides went up by 100%? Probably not, right? It doesn't mean she's mismanaged the police. It doesn't, you know what I mean? And it's that kind of thing. On the other hand, the incumbent mayor has done some things that people don't like ethically. She appointed a police commissioner and then wanted that commissioner to sign a resignation letter so that if he did something they didn't like, they could just remove him, because otherwise he would have a term in office. People don't like that. It doesn't come off very good. Or what I'm saying about, Mark Farrell's issue with Proposition D and utilizing those monies basically for his own campaign. People don't like that. And right now there's just a sense of maybe it's time for different leadership. Now, Lurie's message and I think Peskin's experience of focusing on accountability and what works and rewarding what works rather than simply doing it the same way over and over again. Supervisor Peskin has been a supervisor. He's now in his 4th term, so he served 2 terms. He was out of government for 8 years and returned for 8. He's never been the mayor. He doesn't have the power of a mayor, so when people try to blame him, hey, you've been in government all this time and you haven't done some of these things, he's able to say, yes, but I stopped the worst things from happening, or I've proposed these things within the limits of my power. There's a lot of truth to that. But it depends on how this is going to resonate with the voters. What are they going to go for?
One of the things, Matt, we've been covering on the show as well, we have been interviewing people from different parts of California. And when we are bringing San Franciscans on, we can tell that they dress really well, they're very classy, they're very good at explaining issues, they're very good at talking. They're also very well informed on policy. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we know that the city is struggling in a sense that we are hearing from a lot of other people, a lot of people that don't want to visit San Francisco anymore. They don't want to go there. They don't want to have another event there, another company event there because of some experiences they've had. How is it for you? How is it inside San Francisco for you guys that are there? Do you guys see that the city's, is it the same as 20 years ago or things have changed a lot?
It's a difficult question to answer because I don't share the kind of doomsday kind of view of San Francisco. And I have had family members visit, a family that live in Texas, visit San Francisco. And honestly, they've been quite pleasantly surprised and even shocked at how good the city looks. That's not to say every neighborhood is perfect or it's going to be perfect all the time, but it's not what they were expecting. And I think that images and the repetition that put down a city like San Francisco or try to blast whatever crime footage you have can do a lot of damage to the perception of the city. But, you know, I mean, anybody that travels there will see that it's a very vibrant city, a very strong arts community. Yes, we've got challenges with crime, like many communities have. But in San Francisco, I think it's trying to sort out like the police staffing issues and the priorities for what the police should do with the staffing levels that they have. And even the staffing levels are complicated because police staffing is probably about 300 officers lower than it should be. So from, let's say, 1,800 down to 1,500. But the flip side of that is that we've increased civilian staff in the police department by 300. So the theory is we should have been able to take uniformed officers and get them on the street. That hasn't happened, or we haven't felt the impact of that. At the same time, you know, police officers relate that the culture has changed. If you look back, let's say even 5, 6 years ago, the number of self-initiated arrests was much higher than it is today. So the culture is kind of pushing the police department to be more like the fire department. You don't do anything till you get called to go do it. But the old days, and not even that long ago, police, let's say we're police officers and we've got a beat, what are we going to do? Well, let's go to one of the rougher neighborhoods and let's walk the patrol, or let's make contact with people and see how everybody's doing. And that might lead to arrest or decrease the likelihood of criminality. But so there's a cultural shift. And I think that's where the leadership and how to direct law enforcement becomes so important. Everybody's just fixated on the pure number. We don't have enough, we don't have enough, it's your fault, it's your fault. But, you know, San Francisco also, when you get into full staffing, you take all the communities in California, over 100,000 population, San Francisco has the most police officers per capita than any other city in California. So again, that's not the perception of San Francisco. People think that like we defunded the police and all this stuff, and that's just that's a myth. Most of defunding the police meant putting greater resources in having mental health professionals get called out to deal with a mental health crisis, rather than police officers that didn't have that training, that maybe we could de-escalate conflict by sending experts instead of police. Now, if you think that's defunding the police, okay, but it's really just smarter policing and problem solving.
There are some propositions that they're getting hot. You mentioned Proposition D. This is about having a lot of commissions and commissioners, right?
Well, this is a measure that's being presented to the voters to try to get rid of what is a proliferation of commissions in San Francisco. That's the way the official argument goes. There are a couple of problems with it, though. One is that for some of the commissions that are being retained, they're shifting the balance of power to give the mayor more appointments and less to the Board of Supervisors. Currently, the mayor on key commissions gets a majority of the appointments already. So you don't really need to change that balance of power. I think it's just, it's a bit of a power grab one way. The mayor's already got a majority of the picks. They don't need to have 2/3 of the picks. The second thing is that, you know, it always plays with the voters. And, you know, when you're not very experienced, you can see how much of the political rhetoric is a platitude or a cliche, right? Everyone says, oh, we want to cut red tape for small business. We want to get rid of waste and mismanagement. Oh, we've got all these commissions. They're not doing anything. Well, actually, the commissions are doing something, and it's a way that citizens participate in making advisory or give advisory opinions to the elected body. Or the commissions are not active because they serve their purpose and it's over. So it's kind of being presented like this is some big bureaucracy. Bureaucracy at City Hall exists in departments that have a yearly budget, that have hundreds of people working for them. The advisory commissions we're talking about have no staff. There's no money that's going to them. And oftentimes, they might be created to have a few meetings and give a recommendation. Thereafter, they're no longer in existence. But they might officially be on the books because we didn't terminate them. But that's easy. Just go pass a law at the Board of Supervisors that any commission that hasn't met in the last year is hereby terminated. We don't have to pretend that we're eliminating this huge bureaucracy. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's an issue with the waterfront and how we're doing development near the ballpark. I'm just making this up. And the supervisor for the district says, look, I'm not really an expert in planning and land use, and why don't we form a commission, an advisory commission that'll have members from these different labor, maritime, whatever, and they can give a recommendation on this future planning process. Great, they meet 5 or 6 times, they hear public testimony, and they make recommendations to the board. They haven't met since. Years go by, they haven't met since. Does that commission exist?
But they're still on the books.
They're on the books somewhere, but it's not costing any money. We're not staffing the commission. Nobody's being paid. So it's that kind of thing. Where Prop D really gets into it, though, is when it goes after commissions where the balance of power is trying to correct something that for years was a problem at City Hall. So the mayor used to get all the appointments to the Planning Commission or let's say the Public Utilities Commission. What happens when the mayor appoints someone that has no experience in public utilities? They worked at Juvenile Hall as a probation officer.
Yeah, that's happening now,
and that's
right?
happened
Yeah.
before. And the board had to vote it down 8 out of 11 votes to defeat that appointment. And we did. And the city attorney at the time told me that the mayoral appointment hadn't been defeated in over 20 years. Well, that's not right. There's got to be a checks and balances. So we created situations where, yes, the mayor's the mayor should get a majority of the picks. 7-member body, the mayor gets 4 picks. The board gets the other 3. But all of them have to win majority approval at the board. That has changed the power dynamics because now, someone that serves is serving the city of San Francisco. They're not just serving a mayor. A mayor doesn't call them up and say, I didn't like that, you got to do this, or I'm going to, make you resign. That's not good government,
There's another initiative, Proposition C, that's trying to go after corruption, right?
Right. This is the Inspector General proposition that the chief sponsor is Aaron Peskin, who's running for mayor. The measure, this was kind of modeled, I think, conceptually around like there's a public advocate in New York City. But the public advocate there, I believe, wins election and then does a lot of what you would do, say, is analysis of various departments trying to go after corruption and contracting fraud and things like that. The measure in San Francisco would have the controller who's appointed by a mayor but given a long term. I forget whether it's 9-year term. It's
they can
long
oversee
term.
multiple administrations.
Exactly. And then they would appoint the public or the Inspector General. I'm not a big fan of the Inspector General idea. No offense to Aaron, but I just feel like the whole idea of going after corruption and trying to deal with efficiencies is sort of what the mayor is supposed to do. And when the mayor engages in misconduct, that's what a city attorney and the Board of Supervisors and a district attorney are supposed to do. It just feels like, at a time when people want there to be something done about corruption and about these different things, to create a new position to do something about it. But I don't know, I think it's redundant. but it's popular in people. It'll likely pass.
How much of that has to come from the culture? Like, you know, you've been in these roles, and there's certainly way that people have in the position of power. I assume if they really want to do something, they can probably legally figure out a way of doing it their way. How much of it does to have to come from the person?
You need there to be people in these different posts that, you know, treat that treat people that are engaging in offending conduct appropriately, that they have to get in there and do something about it. It's either to tell somebody that they can't do it, or to bring criminal charges if it's of that level. And you know, there is a shift in San Francisco because some of the corruption scandals that have occurred in the last few years with contracting allegations, Mohammed Nuru, who was the head of DPW, even some of the things happening right now. You know, people want reforms about the requirement to disclose certain benefits that are received. So, you know, they want greater oversight over contracts and things like that. But the whole point of a commission system is that a commission for a particular department should be giving us feedback on what the department is doing. And if you're a commissioner overseeing the Department of Public Works and you see some shady contracting stuff going, you come to me and you tell me about it, and then we can start looking into it. I can call the DA or the city attorney, or you can, and we can get to the bottom of it. I don't know that we need another position to do that. It also absolves the existing players of taking responsibility for doing that part of their job. The controller does a lot of audits already. You know, I would certainly support a measure that tried to empower the controller with maybe greater authority to do these kinds of inspector general functions. But that's just my opinion. I don't have, you know, great insight into it.
Matt, do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Well, I think it's a very exciting election. I think that there have been a number of mayoral forums. I think the voters have gotten to see the individual candidates. And, you know, I think they have gotten to a place in the election where they've really articulated different views. And I think, you know, I think anybody could win this race. But it's starting to look like we're probably going to have a change in leadership. I wouldn't count Mayor Breed out entirely, but it's looking like that because she's been in office for quite a number of years. But, you know, whoever it is, I think a healthy mayoral election, whether you're the incumbent or one of the challengers, one of the things about this process is that you've had to spend a lot of time thinking about the issues, where your shortcomings are if you're the incumbent and how you could improve them, or if you're a challenger, articulating what you would do differently. And so I think it's a very healthy, you know, the democratic process is very healthy and robust.
So we'll get people to work on those solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Going forward.
Yeah.
Matt Gonzalez, former county supervisor from San Francisco and public defender. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you, Siyamak.